Hey there, it's Tom Jordan. We got a great program today. In a moment, we're going to talk about, common sense. When did common sense in education become a legal battle? We're going to talk about Title IX because there's a big battle regarding Title IX, which was meant to protect and not to upend parental rights and student safety. But that's what's been going on. Federal mandates overriding family rights. And thankfully, there are individuals and there are groups that believe that redefining gender should not redefine the rights of parents and of students. And so when federal overreach tramples on school safety, is what it comes down to. They believe it is time to fight back, and that is exactly what my guest today is doing. Monica Yatooma with the Great Education Initiative will join me about this upcoming federal lawsuit, warning schools to not allow boys and men in women and girls' locker rooms. Don't do it. And we'll find out why that is. And she's got a legitimate legal argument to this. Also, I'm watching some headlines which we will get to after that conversation, including last night's U.S. Senate debate between Republican Mike Rogers and Democrat Alyssa Slotkin. Also, looking at Hurricane Milton, a Category 5 storm now, the threat to Florida, it is going to hit hard today, just off the coast there. And we're going to talk about that. And also, Joe Biden's Department of Justice is suing the state of Alabama. The DOJ does not want Alabama to remove non-citizens from voter rolls. I'll get into that. Also, a battleground state, a nonprofit group there, supposedly nonpartisan, encouraging residents without photo identification to cast their ballots in the 2024 election. All right, before those headlines and before we get to Monica, just a reminder to chime in. You can comment, you can ask questions in the comments section, and I will get to those in a moment. In fact, if you'd like to ask our guest a question, you can do that as well. Just make sure you identify it as a question for the guest with the comment itself. Also, the best way you can help Tom Jordan Live is to simply subscribe and then click on that notification bell. And that will alert you to all the great content we have coming your way. And just watch the videos. It helps us out. All right. Imagine this. You're a mother or maybe you're a father and you find yourself powerless when your local school board is enforcing a new policy that allows biological boys to use your daughter's locker room, and you're determined to protect her, the child, but the Biden administration will not let you do that. And that is the reality for parents right now in schools, especially in states where these far left school boards are allowing the intrusion of boys and men into girls' locker rooms to fully expose themselves in the name of inclusion, in the name of love, and in my view, in the name of perversion. It's all based on this redefinition of what's known as Title IX. All right, so what is Title IX? Just so if you don't understand what this is. Title IX was established under the Education Amendments of way back in 1972, and it prevents discrimination based on sex in educational settings, in educational programs. Sex meaning gender, boy or girl, male or female. That's what sex means. So in these educational programs, you can't discriminate on gender, and that especially the ones that receive federal funding. But recently, the Biden administration has broadened the definition of sex to include gender identity and sexual orientation, and the move has sparked a whole slew of legal challenges from multiple organizations and the majority of U.S. states, arguing that this change goes beyond executive authority and it breaches the Administrative Procedure Act, which is known as the APA. And as a result of these legal challenges, these courts have issued preliminary injunctions in 26 states. The majority of the states in this country, the courts have ruled in favor of them. And in the schools with students who are enrolled from the opposing organizations. It's expected that courts will continue to review these cases and will likely impose, permanent injunctions, we hope, but potentially nullifying the new rule from Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and its expanded definition of sex. But in the state of Michigan, which in my view is a microcosm of the current lurch to a progressively destructive and overburdensome and extreme federal government with their out-of-touch and authoritarian mandates. Joe Biden's and Kamala Harris's Title IX goes against state law. So the state law says this can't happen, but the federal law says it can happen. And so now schools are kind of acquiescing to federal law in this. So you can't have a guy in a girl's locker room, no matter how he feels about himself. In other words, if he feels like he's a she, that doesn't still allow him to go into a she locker room, a female locker room, and undress in front of these other girls. You can't do that under state law, but a federal law steps in and suddenly, well, maybe you can do that. And it's happening already in the state of Michigan. I mean, this is going on in these schools in violation of state law. So there's a group called the Great Education Initiative. It's GEI, and they are warning these superintendents and these school boards regarding the Biden administration's redefinition of Title IX, saying they can't do this. And they are opening up themselves to legal ramifications. This redefinition, which expands protections to include gender identity and sexual orientation and sexual attraction, has been blocked in several states by the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals, but Michigan remains unprotected by these federal injunctions. The courts have not ruled in that state. So if you're there, your daughters are still at risk, and the schools are at risk of being sued because they are letting this happen. So GEI is preparing a federal case to challenge this overreach and trying to ensure that Michigan families are safeguarded from all of this. Director of the GEI, Monica Yatooma, is trying to get the word out that families can actually join in this fight, this legal effort, and stand firm against policies that they believe put children at risk. Monica Yatooma joins me now on Tom Jordan Live. Monica, it's good to have you. Thank you for your time, and thanks for what you're doing. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Thanks, Tom.
Well, let's first start with, I guess, this redefinition. Joe Biden comes in, the Biden administration, and they redefine what Title IX means and this redefinition of sex. So you got this like federal perspective on this. But then you have Michigan state law, which does not include, I guess, that kind of guidance on Title IX. So there's this conflict in laws. So how is this? How are schools supposed to navigate this confusion?
So there's really no conflict. Federal law always trumps state law. And there are school districts that understand this, and they've not made any changes across the state yet, but there are school districts receiving bad advice from their attorneys, and they seem to think that they can follow the new Title IX ruling. So you explained it. You did a great job. I've been listening to you the whole time. You explained it really well. Trying to redefine the word sex to include gender identity and sexual orientation, it just doesn't fly on a federal level. And there are judges all across the country who agree with this, because there are states, not just here in Michigan and groups like ours, but in Tennessee and in Arkansas and Kansas, all filing for injunctions. And all these temporary injunctions have been granted. So what that tells us is these judges across the country are saying, hey, we agree with you, parents. This doesn't make any sense, and we're not going to let this pass.
Yeah, and it does make sense, and it seems to be unanimous. 26 states in the entirety of the country, that's the majority of the states, and it sounds like all of them that have brought this to the courts have won in that regard. But why has Michigan not been included in these rulings?
So I don't know why exactly. I can't answer that, because originally Michigan was supposed to be included. And then in talking to some of these attorneys, for whatever reason, it wasn't. I know there's some confusion because of Michigan's Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. However, like I said before, federal law trumps state law. And so when we file, and actually when we sent the letter to these superintendents, that's what we said when we cautioned them. We said, hey, this federal law trumps this state law. And so we're hoping that they will abide by that. But I think that's where the confusion is. It's because of Michigan's Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act.
Yeah, right. And that's a good point, because the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act redefined the word sex as well to include a gender identity and those types of issues. So in fact, you can maybe argue that the state of Michigan legally does allow these kind of things. If they've does that correlate? I mean, the redefinition of sex in the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act and Title IX, do they work in tandem on this, or are they completely separate issues?
Well, they're trying to get them to say the same thing, but they're two completely separate issues.
Okay.
Michigan's Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act applies to issues outside of the school setting, right? For example, like the work setting. So Title IX is specifically geared towards boys and girls sports, boys in girls' private spaces like bathrooms and locker rooms. The whole point of Title IX was to protect girls and women in sports. So Michigan's Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act is kind of, it takes it a little further. It's an expansion, more of an expansion, and it's all encompassing, right? So it goes outside of sports and outside of schools.
It is the craziest thing. I mean, Monica, I got to admit, I never thought, if even 5 years ago, that we'd be arguing over this whole issue, whether or not boys, men should be allowed in girls or female locker rooms, and even girls in girls' sports having biological boys and biological men play in those things. But that is what has happened, and that is a major social battle that's going on, as you mentioned, in the workforce, but in schools and professional sports and college sports, the whole gamut, and it's a very intense battle. But when you break it down like you are right now with GEI, and you're dealing with the issue, what Title IX was intended to do, which was to protect girls, and there's supposed to be some type of parental authority. But how does this? I mean, you're arguing these Title IX policies, the way that they've been redefined, that they undermine parental rights. How do you, in your view, how do these undermine the parental authority when it comes to protecting their own children?
Well, they're trying to remove any decision making from parents or parent figures, right? So grandparents, uncles, aunts, whoever's taking care of that child. And so that's not okay. Parents are the sole decision makers for their children. And I agree with you that this is absurd. 5 years ago, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. It doesn't, I mean, from a common sense standpoint, to put a male in, female sports, I mean, they have larger bone density, they have larger muscle mass, they have a larger arm wingspan. I mean, it's not fair. Not only is it not fair, it's a safety and a privacy concern. It's dangerous. It's also dangerous if you're putting a male in women's locker room spaces, bathroom spaces. And so you're leaving these girls and these women very vulnerable. And so it's very frustrating for a parent because you're really completely undermining parental authority. And so that should never be okay.
So let's talk about the safety risk, because I know this is part of your argument in this lawsuit, is that there is a real safety risk here for girls under this new redefinition of the Biden administration's Title IX. So I don't know how specific you can get here, but as specific as you can, the safety concerns that are being raised. How should, and so identify them if you can, and then how should schools realistically, if you say they care about these kids, address those risks?
Well, look, let's just take Virginia as an example, right? So they were allowing males into female restrooms, and in one particular case, a male raped a female. The
Hmm.
school tried to cover it up. The father went in there and tried to, obviously, there was an uproar. They tried to cover it up. They took the kid, moved him to another school. Well, that didn't fix the problem. He raped a girl again in the different school because the rules were still the same. They were still allowing boys in the girls' bathrooms. So that's what we're talking about. I mean, that's a really extreme example, but this is what could happen. And then who's to say if a male identifies as a female and says, "Well, I'm more comfortable in a female locker room or restroom," how do we know that they don't have some sort of weird fetish or tendency, or that they just want to watch girls change? We don't know that. What protections do women and girls have if you're going to completely take away Title IX or impose laws like Michigan's Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act? What protection? There's no protection.
There's no protection, and it's amazing to me because I remember that case very well that you mentioned in Virginia, and that's the obvious risk. That, listen, any guy that says, I'm a woman, I identify as a woman, you don't know the real intention, and the obvious risk is that guys are going to pretend that they identify with women in order to go in their restrooms and in their locker rooms because, as you say, they might have some strange fetish. That was obvious just a few years ago. Now they pretend that that's That's insulting for someone to claim that that would actually be a possibility, but it is. And I remember very clearly in the state of Michigan, there was a gentleman, I use that term loosely, in one of our schools who stood up at these school board meetings and was fighting for the rights for transgenders to be able to go into the restrooms of his or her choice. And he was an outspoken individual that was lauded by these schools and these, trans rights individuals. Turned out that that individual, this was about a year and a half ago, that individual was arrested and busted for pedophilia. And so this is a reality that most common sense individuals would understand on its very face is very real in our society. And so now it's being covered up and it's being buried. And that to me is one of the larger concerns, is that there's such a staunch effort from some school districts and from government officials to cover up the real risk for children. So in this lawsuit, and when you speak with these superintendents, is that part of your conversation to them?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. It's part of our conversation. I mean, look, Tom, transgender individuals, there's not a right that they don't have that we have. They have all the same rights.
Yeah.
So when they try to go a step further and ask for these extra rights, like, hey, we want to be able to play in girls' sports or go in their bathrooms, it's a little ridiculous. It's kind of loony. And these schools, there's a very simple solution, and we've gone to them and we said, all right, if you want to protect the rights of transgenders, no problem, but you also have to protect the rights of girls and women and also their safety and their privacy. So let's go to unisex single stall bathrooms so that only one person can go in at a time. And that's also a suggestion that we've made to schools in Michigan.
Is there pushback against that?
Well, they don't want to spend the money to do it, a lot of them. So, yes, I would say there's some pushback.
I see these buildings. They're pretty nice buildings. These school districts, they have, tens of millions of dollars in these, millages and all these things. I'm sure they could afford maybe a few extra bathrooms if this is such an important, if not, separate the boys and the girls. That just seems to make sense. Has the response been, I don't know how many conversations you've had thus far, but how has the response been from some of these school officials?
Listen, it's a little scattered. It's not all the same. So some schools are kind of in a standstill, and they're kind of like, okay, we're not going to do anything yet. We're going to see what happens with this injunction. And some schools are of the mindset that, yes, we can do this and there's nothing stopping us and this injunction doesn't matter. Unfortunately, it varies district by district because it really just depends on the school board and the superintendent. And across the board throughout the state, that all looks very different.
How does this, redefinition of Title IX, how does it conflict, in your view, with the part of the First Amendment is religious freedom? And I know religiously, there's a lot of people who are opposed to this kind of, behavior in schools and what's being allowed. Is that part of your conversation that you're having, at least in terms of on the legal side of this, the lawsuit, when you look at religious freedom versus what Title IX now allows?
So it's not part of the conversation right now, but it's not off the table. And I know it's been part of the conversation when they were trying to expand the Michigan Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act. There was a lot of, there were some senators and representatives saying, hey, wait a minute, this completely violates the First Amendment. What about people with certain religions, et cetera, et cetera. And the consensus that we seem to get and the message that we seem to get is the Democrats just don't care. They don't seem to care about the First Amendment, and they certainly don't care about religious freedom.
You're right, they don't. I've had conversations with them, and I've had individuals actually tell me that, for example, quote, Christianity is a civil rights violation. That was one of the claims in the accusations against a point I was trying to make regarding something different, another thing, Project 2025, which you were claiming will. Anyway, that's another conversation, but you're right. They do not seem to care about the First Amendment, and they actually think that somehow religion is a violation of the First Amendment somehow. They got it backwards on this. I would imagine that your case will have greater impact if more parents get involved. How is that, and what can parents do to support this initiative?
Definitely. It's very similar to the Moms for America injunction. So the Great Education injunction, you just go to www.greatei.org. You sign up to be a GEI member, and that's it. It's free. It doesn't cost any money. And then you can follow us on any social media platform, really, where we post a lot. I personally post a lot and I update a lot about what's going on, especially in the state of Michigan, and that's just Monica Yatooma official. So www.greatei.org, and you just sign up to be a member. And if you sign up, then your schools will be included in the injunction.
Okay, I just want to make sure I get that right. It's greatei.org is what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay,
Yep.
good. People should go there. So these legal liabilities that some of these Michigan schools are opening themselves up to, what are they? And what the conversations when you have with these superintendents? Listen, if you go down this route, this is potentially what is going to happen to you. What are the potentials for schools that don't abide by what seems to be common sense for these kids?
Well, they're going to be violating court orders. They're going to be infringing on individual constitutional rights, and they're going to be opening up themselves to a whole lot of civil rights lawsuits. So that's the direction they're headed if they choose to enforce the Title IX ruling.
Okay, so lawsuits potentially from parents, I would imagine, families
Civil.
that
Yep.
feel that
Yep.
their kids' rights have been violated. So is that part of your education? You're allowing parents to know, listen, if this happens to you, you have a right to fight back legally. What are some of their options?
Yeah. So, and that's what we do, right? At Great Education Initiative is we provide advocacy for these parents and these students, and we provide legal resources. So we tell them, hey, if you're experiencing this, you go to www.greatei.org, submit a violation form, and our legal team will review, we'll be in touch, and then we'll pursue the case accordingly.
I got to ask you this because there's a broader issue here. This is happening, of course, relation to Title IX, and there's other things that are in place, but there is this broader issue that seems to, Todd. I've had conversations with members of the Senate in the state of Michigan who are absolutely behind this effort to redefine sex to make sure that it includes, transgender rights, which, as you pointed out, they have the same rights that we have. If you're not transgender or you still have the same rights. They're actually advocating for special rights for that minority population in the state. I spoke with Senator Mallory McMorrow regarding this whole issue. And her position and her Democratic colleagues in the state legislature's position on this, and they voted this way on the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act anyway, but their whole point was that it is harmful to kids, whether they're in first or second or third grade, to not affirm their belief that they're the opposite gender that they were born with. And I said, well, what brings you to that conclusion? And she says, why are we even having this conversation? We're trying to prevent these kids from killing themselves. And if we don't affirm their belief that they're the opposite sex than what they were born with, they might kill themselves. But beyond that, I don't understand the logic behind it, because there isn't any logic that supports that data is actually true, that if we don't affirm them, they're going to kill themselves. But that's the excuse they're given. So I don't know how many battles you've had or conversations with members of the legislature in the state of Michigan. But this ideology that's behind this, is there any truth to that? And your perspective, what is the reality when it comes to a little kid, say, coming to an adult saying, hi, I'm in first grade. I was born a boy, but I feel like I'm a girl. What should that adult tell that child?
So, Mallory and a lot of the Democrats in the state legislature are very extreme. And so that is the reason we're seeing a lot of what we see today on a state level and a federal level is this extremism. And in fact, what she's alluding to, it's not logical. There's no scientific, there's no science to back it. And in fact, the science says the opposite. So kids at that age, they have imaginary friends. And I mean, it's an age where they're exploring and they're learning. And so, sure, they might say, oh, I feel like a boy or I feel like a girl. Well, as a parent, I know I, as a parent, would say, oh, okay, like if my son came to me and he said, Mom, I feel like I'm a girl. Oh, well, why do you think you're a girl? Oh, well, I don't know. I thought this dress on this girl was cute. I don't know, something silly. But at that age, they don't know that they want to be a boy or a girl. They don't know what they want to wear that day. They don't even know what they want to eat. They're still learning how to use the bathroom properly. So for somebody like Senator Mallory McMorrow to say, oh, we have to affirm these kids, and then go extremely to the extreme and say, if we don't, they're going to kill themselves. That's all they do. That's what their arguments are based on, is emotion and tugging on people's heartstrings. But that's not logical. It's not scientific. And there's nothing to back that. And like I said earlier, the science in fact says that's wrong. It's okay to correct your kids and guide them in the direction that they need to go. That's the whole point of setting boundaries and having parents and having rules. I mean, you can't let a kid decide these things, especially when it's something that could be permanent in nature. When you're talking about getting into the hormones and the surgeries, there's no reversing this. And so what we see as these kids get older, they're regretting their decision to have surgery or to take the hormones. And now as females, they can't have children because they're completely sterile. I mean, this is not only a decision they're not ready to make, it's a dangerous decision to make if you are not an adult and a full and sound body and mind.
Yeah, that is so true because the reality is, and these other countries are learning this. I mean, we have case studies overseas, even the United Kingdom, which is very liberal. They have pulled back on this whole issue of, minors wanting to transition to another gender because they've seen the outcome of it. And I think it was the UK and Denmark. They found out that like 90 some odd percent of all of those cases get resolved come puberty. And when that happens, they kind of balance themselves out and they go through it and they're, oh, I was wrong. I was being a silly child. So they've pulled back on these laws in those countries and they've banned transgender surgery for minors because of that very reason. And yet we're like 5 years behind in the United States. And it is very disturbing what is happening in this country. And it is a very serious issue because the vast majority of that I know someone who is transgender. And that individual tells me that the vast majority of the people that this person knows who think they're the opposite sex are really not. And they find out too late because once you have the procedure, it's too late. You can never go back and you are permanently scarred for life. So a lot of these kids who have this operation done, once they're 19, 20, 21, realize that was the greatest mistake of their life. And all you do in that case is increase the mental illness and the anxiety and the depression in their lives. You've done the exact opposite of what they are claiming to do. It's sad. So one final word from you in terms of because I think what you're doing is phenomenal. I think you need to continue to fight this, and I think Title IX and protecting girls in these locker rooms, and I say girls because it's typically the guys who are of this kind of nature. They're visually stimulated, and at that age, prior to or when you're going through puberty and you're in that middle school, high school time frame, girls are very much at risk as it is. Then you open up the door to locker rooms. It's absurd and very dangerous. One final thought from you in terms of, what you hope comes out of this campaign you've got going and your education to superintendents and for parents to join you in this fight.
Yeah. So, and just to add really quick on one thing that you said, we are finding that a lot of these kids coming out and saying that they're transgender fall somewhere on the autism spectrum and have at least one mental disorder, right? Whether it's depression or body dysmorphic disorder. So these are kids that need help.
Yeah.
So I'll say this. We're doing this because we truly want to protect children, all children. If somebody wants to transition or become transgender, that's fine. Nobody's against that. What we're saying is let these kids be kids and let them go through their childhood and in adulthood. If they decide they want to make this decision, let that be a decision when they're adults. This case is really important. It's about the protection of children. It's about the protection of their rights, but also parental rights and parental autonomy. And so any parents that feel like they need any guidance on this or any help or want to join this injunction, just go to www.greatei.org. And we're there to answer any questions too.
Very good. I hope a lot of people join you in this, and I can't thank you enough for taking the time to talk about this very important issue. Monica Yatooma with the Great Education Initiative. It's greatei.org, right? I got it right?
Yes, you did.
Okay, good. Monica, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
All right, that's a very important issue, and it's something that I'm astounded at how many people are somehow in support because it is an emotional issue when you talk about your children, but also when you see a child who's going through some type of mental anguish because they feel that there's something other than that they were born with, and that being gender. You want to help that child, but the answer as an adult is not to just whatever you believe you are, that's who you are. No, guide them as an adult should, because when that child becomes an adult, it is very likely, it's almost certain that they will regret the affirmation that you're giving them and going down that path. It's almost certain that that will be a lifelong regret that there's no turning back from. So act like adults. Care for your children by steering them in the proper direction. All right, I want to get to some headlines here. Big debate last night. You probably saw it, maybe heard it as well. Here it is, Michigan's Senate race, national security at the forefront. I took a lot away from that conversation. Candidates Alyssa Slotkin, the Democrat, and Mike Rogers, the Republican, clashing over their records on Iran, on Israel, on China, and border security. The economy was part of this as well. But this was part of the exchange on Iran that I want you to see here. The real enemy at war right now with Israel, and by extension with the United States, Iran. Iran hates two groups of people. First, it's Israel, and second, the United States. They want to eradicate the Jews, and they want to destroy the Americans. Let's listen to that part of this exchange.
I think one of the big problems that people have been trying to be on both sides of this issue, we could have a ceasefire tomorrow if Hamas would give up the hostages. We have 4 Americans still there. Those Americans should be brought home. They were dragged out of their homes viciously on October 7th, dragged into the tunnels of Gaza, right? So I think that right now, what we should do is support Israel getting this piece right, frame out a ceasefire based on getting the hostages out first. They need the ability to defend themselves. They're being attacked from the north. They're having attacks coming in from Gaza. And where all of this has started is in Tehran. And so if we don't contain Tehran, I'm telling you what, we'll have more trouble. We'll be more engulfed in the Middle East.
I want to give you 15 seconds. Is there a red line that Israel could cross that would lose your support?
Well, I mean, hypotheticals don't work in this. They have to defend themselves. You have to remember, Iran is coming at them through Hezbollah. Okay. Iran is coming at them through Hamas. Iran has attacked 200 installations across the Middle East since October 7th.
Congressman Slotkin, the same question to you. Is there a red line beyond which Israel could go that would lose your support?
Yeah, well, I was just at a memorial service yesterday for our 1-year anniversary. It's still extremely raw. It's very personal here in Michigan, where people of all stripes have real personal connections to the region. For me, it's clear we need a ceasefire deal that brings the hostages home. Israel has the right to defend itself when people come and kill their citizens, rape women, shoot ballistic missiles at them. That is something that any country in the world has the right to do. But we can also say that we don't like seeing loss of life among civilians. Iran is now in a very interesting moment. Their big proxies have been killed or been wiped down in Hezbollah and Hamas, and they just fired a really strategic round of ballistic missiles, including hypersonic missiles. Israel has, again, the right to respond to that. But for me, what I won't do is I won't say that the United States should get back into a big land war in the Middle East. We spent 20 years in Iraq, and I served 3 tours there alongside the military. For me, I am not interested in having another 20-year war in the Middle East.
Same question to you, 15 seconds to answer. Is there a red line beyond which Israel can go that will lose your support?
Again, the idea that we would be sucked into putting American sons and daughters in there. My opponent was a very big supporter of the Iraq War. He was one of the leaders that got us into that war. I do not support another land war in the Middle East.
Congressman Rogers, you have a 30-second rebuttal to try to deal with all of these issues, including that red line.
Yeah, unfortunately, my opponent was wrong on all of this. The architect of the nuclear deal with Iran, the fact that she supported making sure that Saudi couldn't defend itself against the Houthis, taking the Houthis off the terrorist list, which, by the way, is now shooting at U.S. troops, including our Navy, in the Red Sea, making Iran have the capital by allowing them to sell oil into the market, has engulfed us in the Middle East. Bad decision, bad decision, bad decision. Not standing up to the fact that they're using their proxies across the Middle East, not only to attack Israel, our ally, but it's also to attack those 100 different installations around the Middle East.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. And you see there, Alyssa Slotkin, a self-proclaimed, national security expert, facing a lot of scrutiny for her role in crafting the Iran nuclear deal and for her opposition to the killing of the Iranian terrorist, the leader, Qasem Soleimani. That deal that Slotkin supported, That deal allowed billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars to flow into Iran and is exactly what funds these terrorist activities in that whole region. Hamas, Hezbollah, that is funded by these Iranian dollars, these billions of dollars that have only come through after the Biden-Harris administration. And listen, she voted lockstep with Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in that regard. And that is a major reason why Hamas was able to attack by surprise on October the 7th to 2023 and why they continue to fight. And listen, her refusal, Alyssa Slotkin, to back Donald Trump's decision to eliminate Soleimani, a man responsible for the deaths of countless Americans and our allies, has raised a whole lot of questions about her judgment when it comes to protecting U.S. interests abroad. I mean, her record on Israel is also under fire by a lot of people. Alyssa Slotkin has refused to condemn Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. Her anti-Semitic remarks, her refusal to support Israel in this. And she even protected her from censure. A lot of Democrats did as well. It's not just Alyssa Slotkin, but as Debbie Dingell, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, they're all refusing to go against their friend, Rashida Tlaib, who represents a large group of people who want the eradication of the country of Israel. They want them gone. Slotkin has gone as far as voting against emergency funding for Iran's Iron Dome missile defense system, which defends Israeli civilians from terrorist rocket attacks. And one other thing that Mike Rogers made a very good point to, because you heard Alyssa Slotkin in that debate last night say, my opponent, Mike Rogers, he voted for the war in Iraq to occur. The information they had on Iraq back then was intelligence that came from Alyssa Slotkin's CIA. She was a data analyst with the CIA back then, and it's her intelligence agency that said, Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. She left that out. Let's talk about China. Slotkin's involvement in bringing this Chinese Communist Party affiliated battery plant to her state of Michigan has sparked a whole lot of outrage. We talked about this this week, and we've spoken about it with Mike Rogers as well. She signed a secret agreement allowing this plant to receive Michigan taxpayer dollars, despite the warnings that the Chinese Communist Party can use these projects for espionage. And that's not just from Republicans. That's from the Director of National Intelligence. That's from the Department of Homeland Security. That's from the FBI and the Department of Justice. They all say, and we're warning about this plant in particular, that she signed a non-disclosure agreement to get information about what's happening, and she's not revealing that. So Mike Rogers has been warning about the Chinese threat for many years. I've talked to him over the years about that and calling for stronger measures to counter China's influence and protect American security. The border security thing came up. It's being questioned after 6 years in Congress. Alyssa Slotkin voting for mass amnesty, opposing the deportations of criminals. Her votes to halt the border wall's construction and against border security measures have contributed to the current crisis. Fentanyl is pouring into Michigan, her state, and it's destroying families. Mike Rogers has said, listen, I pledge to restore a whole slew of proven border security measures like Remain in Mexico. That would be like day one when if Donald Trump wins, he is walking in terms lockstep with Donald Trump as it comes to border security. And EVs, government overreach on the electric vehicle mandates. Mike Rogers, he points out that the electric grid's incapacity to take on this new demand highlights this critical flaw in the rush toward federally mandated electric vehicle policies that they want to put in place. And these regulations risk jobs. They strain an already fragile grid, and it shows once again that government interference creates more problem than it solves. And Alyssa Slotkin has been in full support of these electric vehicle mandates until very recently, when she started to see how unpopular they are with the voting public in the state of Michigan and how it directly impacts manufacturing. And Michigan is a heavy auto manufacturing state. Of course, Detroit, the big three automakers, Ford, used to be Chrysler, now Stellantis. and General Motors, headquartered in the state of Michigan. Well, these EV mandates are not selling. The electric vehicles are not, and they require fewer people to make those cars anyway, so they're not very popular in our state. So she's suddenly flipped, but her voting records tells you enough that you need to know about where she stands on those. And Alyssa, when it comes to the supply chain and China's grips on this, Alyssa Slotkin claims that America can outcompete China by boosting the electric vehicle production. There's no way that's true. Mike Rogers has said, listen, China still controls key parts of the electric vehicle supply chain around the world. We heard Senator Lana Tice say the same thing and gave you real numbers about how much China controls in addition to how much China owns when it comes to the supply chain in relation to electric vehicles and also in relation to fossil fuels, because they're building like a new coal plant every single week in the country of China. So relying on them to build the next generation of vehicles is rightfully so stated a national security risk. And they talked about inflation, they talked about housing costs, and Rogers' critique of Kamala Harris's plan to, spot a $25,000 for somebody who can't afford a house. Well, here's $25,000 for a down payment, and that'll help you out and get you a house. That's only going to exacerbate the housing crisis by driving up prices further. It's also going to put people into homes and maybe a loan that they can't truly afford. And that is what brought down the housing market back in 2007, 2008. If you remember that, I do very clearly. It's because too many people took out loans they couldn't afford by being incentivized by the federal government, which started with Bill Clinton back when he was president. Medicare negotiations, drug prices. Slotkin's support of Medicare negotiating drug prices. This doesn't get brought up, I don't think, clearly enough, but it's just another form of government control. While it sounds good on paper, these policies, they ultimately lead to increased premiums and limited access to these life-saving medications. That would be a big reason why Mike Rogers opposed that, because, listen, Alyssa Slotkin told me back in 2018 that with the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, she understood back then, the premiums are too high right now, but listen, get me into office and those premiums are going to go down. Just watch. What's happened instead? They've only gone up and they will continue to go up. That was the debate last night. If you can catch it, Wood TV was the broadcaster out in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Did a pretty good job. Rick Album, not Rick, what's his name? Yeah, Rick Album, the political reporter there, moderating that debate. All right, there's a Michigan Nonprofit Association. We'll get to Hurricane Milton in a moment, but I want to talk about this. Michigan Nonprofit Association, that's the name of a nonprofit in Michigan. They've launched a campaign encouraging residents without photo identification to cast their ballots in the 2024 election. That's what they were encouraging. And this is an ad that they have put out. And according to this commercial, which started running last Friday, voters who lack identification can still vote by signing a simple affidavit. The ad states, no photo ID? No problem. You can still vote. And then it directs voters to the Michigan Secretary of State's webpage for more details, instructions, how to vote if you don't have an ID. And this ad has been seen by more than 150,000 people on Facebook and Instagram alone. And of course, it's raising concerns about election integrity, especially given Michigan's history of controversial voting reforms. And this latest push is part of a broader effort by Democrats who have also advocated for driver's licenses for illegal immigrants. But Republicans who have previously sued the state over these election changes, they're arguing, look, these measures weaken election security and they weaken transparency. Obviously, they do. And these are some of the election integrity concerns. Encouraging voters to bypass ID checks undermines basic election security measures, increasing the potential for fraud and then weakening the trust in the electoral process. That's what's weakening trust in the electoral process. It's not talking about the fact that they don't want to allow voter ID in these elections. And there's very targeted messaging in these advertisements that they're putting out there. These ads are clearly aimed at these so-called vulnerable populations who may not have the necessary documentation. Who wouldn't have the necessary documentation? Who might that be? Maybe illegal immigrants who have come into this country. So there's this affidavit loophole. So you only require a signed form instead of a verified identification. So you just sign here and you're good to go, and it likely will never be checked because that's been the history now under the Secretary of State there, Jocelyn Benson, in the state of Michigan. It invites manipulation, especially in this state that has all sorts of lawsuits that are challenging the legitimacy of its voter rolls in Michigan. And listen, voter ID is a basic safeguard. The argument that voter ID requirements disenfranchises voters is a total smokescreen. Every American deserves the right to vote, but elections have got to be fair. They got to be transparent. They got to be protected from fraud. And the vast majority of Americans, regardless of their ethnic background, they support voter identification. You know who doesn't support voter ID? Illegal immigrants and scammers, fraudsters. So the whole push here is part of this broader progressive agenda to dismantle the safeguards in the name of accessibility, which in reality opens the door to election tampering and manipulation by a whole slew of bad actors. So IDs should be required. Here's another election-related story in a move that could have a significant national consequences in this. The Biden administration's Department of Justice, they have filed a lawsuit against the state of Alabama seeking to block their efforts to remove non-citizens from their voter rolls. Alabama's Secretary of State, guy's name is Wes Allen. He launched an initiative which the whole aim was identifying and inactivating non-citizens who had been issued identification numbers by the Department of Homeland Security. But they remain on these voter rolls in the state of Alabama. They don't think that should be so. The Department of Justice, on their part, they claim that this effort violates the National Voter Registration Act, which includes a quiet period preventing tenants within 90 days of an election. So they say, listen, we're 90 days out. Let's not take the bad actors out of here, those who aren't eligible to vote. Let's just keep them on for now until after the election. That makes sense, doesn't it? A whole another example of federal overreach. The Department of Justice, this lawsuit, it's just another example of the federal government blocking states from securing their own elections and ensuring that only eligible citizens can vote. And this is what undermines, again, election integrity. By preventing Alabama from removing non-citizens, the administration is opening the door to potential voter fraud and undermining confidence in the electoral process. And this has to do with state rights. Alabama is very vested in making sure that their elections are secure, and it appears that the Department of Justice is very vested to make sure that it isn't. All right, let's go to the campaigns. With less than a month until the 2024 presidential election, the race between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump remains razor thin in some key battleground states. Kamala Harris faces a real uphill battle in places like Georgia, where her once solid path there has become pretty shaky because of Donald Trump's renewed relationship with the governor, Brian Kemp. They're back on good terms together. Brian Kemp sees the danger that Kamala Harris poses to this country and, to the state of Georgia. So now Georgia has become a toss-up state. Meantime, Pennsylvania, traditionally a pretty crucial state for the Democrats, they see Harris with only a slight lead in Pennsylvania. Arizona is slipping further from her grasp as well as the campaigns wind down. Both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are bracing for some potential surprises. It is October, right? Trump's legal troubles, they continue. And the fallout, of course, from Hurricane Helene and now Hurricane Milton in this final stretch that adds some unpredictability to the race. Early voting has already begun, by the way, in several states, and the outcome in the swing states will ultimately determine who takes the White House. A lot of complications. I mean, Georgia, when you look at Georgia, Kamala Harris's struggles there, I think it highlights the significant challenge of winning over moderate voters in traditionally these conservative states. Donald Trump's ability to kind of mend fences with Governor Kemp reveals a unique political resilience that he has. And I think underscores the GOP's unity when it really counts. The GOP is united in that. Pennsylvania, very important state. And despite leading slightly in Pennsylvania, Kamala Harris, her fragile grip shows that her economic policies have not resonated deeply at all, not even shallowly, with working class voters. Donald Trump is very focused on energy and always has been, and manufacturing always has been. And that has likely chipped away at Kamala Harris's appeal in those key areas like, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Looking at Arizona, the border crisis is huge there. And the shift in Arizona's polling over the past 3.5 years reflects voter frustration with Kamala Harris's ineffective immigration policies. They've been asking for, look at Henry Cuellar down, well, he's in Texas, but the same issue is reflective of, I think Mark Kelly was the senator in Arizona. He came out strongly opposed to the Biden-Kamala Harris administration's perspective on illegal immigration because he saw in real time what was happening to his state. Very ineffective immigration policies. And Donald Trump's strong stance on border security clearly resonating in the state of Arizona, where illegal crossings have soared under the Biden-Harris administration. The North Carolina scandal there, Kamala Harris, her narrow lead in North Carolina is less about her strengths and really more about the scandal that's dragging down some of Donald Trump's numbers there. And, you look at what's happened in North Carolina, too, when you look at the response to Hurricane Helene there, it is absolutely horrendous the way they've responded to this with FEMA and not getting access to some of these mountain communities in North Carolina. That's hurting Kamala Harris. Then there's this Robinson controversy there that's hurting Donald Trump. I'm not going to get into that right now because I want to get to Michigan. We're running low on time here. But Michigan's Arab American voters, the abandonment of Harris by Arab American voters in Michigan, particularly in places like Dearborn, Michigan, that could be the deciding factor in this tight race. And there's a city called Hamtramck in Michigan. It's right next to Detroit, Michigan. It is the only, I think it's the first city council in all of the United States that is a all-Muslim city council in the city of Hamtramck. The mayor of Hamtramck has come out in support of Donald Trump because they're tired of what they've been seeing the Democrats do. And so they're going with Donald Trump, which was a big surprise to a lot of folks. But if you look at what, Muslims typically agree with and the radical left lurch socially by Democrats, it's really a no-brainer is why more of them are turning towards Republicans, at least on the social issues. So it's a pretty tight race in the state of Michigan as well. And, balancing the domestic concerns with the foreign policy, missteps is really costing her a lot of support there as well. All right, let's go to Hurricane Milton. We are watching this because this is massive. Look at the size of that storm. It's a Category 5 storm right now. Here's the latest. Hurricane Milton, it's rapidly closing in on Florida's west coast. A powerful storm surge is expected. We're talking about potentially, 10 feet or higher, maybe 15 feet in some spots. And that means the water, the flooding, that's going to go above, houses, above the rooftops of many houses. That's how deep the water will likely become in some of these areas. So the National Hurricane Center is warning residents in the area of these life-threatening conditions as a Category 5 hurricane barrels towards landfall. It's supposed to make landfall today, and Tampa, between Tampa, I think down to Fort Myers, that's that real zone of concern, or cone of concern, I think is what they're calling it. The winds there are already topping 160 miles per hour. Rainfall expected to hit 12 to 18 inches in some of those areas, and flash flooding is going to be a massive concern. It's almost certain that flash flooding will occur, and the officials are urging immediate evacuations. If you can get out, or you might just need to hunker down, depending on where you are. I've talked to some friends, and they've moved eastward. Some have gone to Orlando, Florida. Some have gone to Jacksonville. Some have gone to the other side of the state. But that whole swath there in Florida is just in a path of destruction. So be careful. There are widespread power outages are expected, of course, And of course, the catastrophic flooding, very likely. And look at the backup of people just trying to flee the danger area there. So preparations to protect life, property should be completed urgently. The state bracing for Milton's devastating impact later today and later tonight. And I know there was some politicizing of this with Kamala Harris lambasting Governor Ron DeSantis, who's doing a phenomenal job with his citizens in the state of Florida. She said that, because he wasn't able to pick up the call, that, somehow that wasn't cooperating. But he's been working directly with the president, Joe Biden. And Joe Biden has come out and said, Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida is doing a tremendous job. Joe Biden, Ron DeSantis are working together, and I applaud Joe Biden in that. And he's dealing directly with Ron DeSantis. And it's kind of nice to see that now that he's no longer running for re-election, he's just dealing with the actual crisis as it stands and how to help the people best they see fit. And of course, Ron DeSantis taking the lead while Kamala Harris is on these talk shows drinking beers with Stephen Colbert and sitting down with Howard Stern, cracking jokes and whatnot. While people's lives, people are already dying in these horrific situations in Florida. So prayers are out there for them as well. Let's see if we have any comments. I'd like to get your comments if there are any. Cameron, do we have any that we can pop up on the board? Always like that. Chris Marie, in Orlando, tornadoes are a big danger as well. Chris Marie, you're right about that. I was watching various the Weather Channel. I think we're watching Fox Weather and these various weather bulletins, and they were showing, as it was out in the Gulf of Mexico, the hurricane was, that the number of tornadoes back over the water, they call them water spouts, but they are very, very strong, very large water spouts, soon to be tornadoes once it hits land. And I just thought, my wife and I were watching this last night, and I thought, man, you've got the hurricane to worry about. You got these massive winds and potentially 15-foot storm surge that will bury you with water. And then you got tornadoes mixed in with this as well. It is a violent storm. So yeah, thank you for that. That's something to watch out for as well. So if people can't get out, try to get down below the surface of the ground if you can, on a basement or whatever they have there in Florida. The engineer, a good friend, just yesterday, the FBI arrested an Afghan national because he had a plan to shoot up a polling place. Yes, I'm glad you brought this up, the engineer. I can only hope this never happens, but everybody needs to be prepared. This is tragic. So I thought about this morning, and this threat now to blow up polling places on Election Day. That is a real threat, and it got me thinking, well, maybe I should cast my vote early because of that. Are there other attacks planned? We caught this guy who was, as you mentioned, this Afghan refugee that somehow got allowed into this country because there wasn't proper vetting, because the rapid and disastrous withdrawal out of Afghanistan. So let's just let them in, flood them into this country. We don't know who they are, but obviously they're fleeing the Taliban, who we allowed to take control of Afghanistan. So let's just bring them all in. And it's just the chances are that a certain percentage of them are going to pose a danger to this country. And there you go, exhibit probably Z now of the danger that some of these people that are coming to this country pose to this country. And I'm glad the FBI caught that individual, but it just makes you wonder how many more are out there. So please, if you can vote early, do it. Any more, Cameron, or is that about it? Annie, great debate last night. You're right, Annie. It was. I think Mike Rogers did a good job. And listen, Alyssa Slotkin is a very smart individual. I'm not saying she's not, but I think when Mike Rogers said, what did he say? Those two words, deceptive and I think deceitful or something like that, means the same thing. There was another term, but he's right. And I started covering Alyssa Slotkin back in 2018, and subsequent elections, I've seen her tell these non-truths and disinformation time and again to such a degree that it was incredibly troubling to me how she was so convincing, the way she was deceiving people and mischaracterizing their opponents into believing they did something which was the opposite of the truth. And I'm glad Mike Rogers brought that up last night, because he said everything she just told you right there, the opposite is true. And I've seen her do that, and that's concerning to me. But yeah, it was a good debate. I enjoyed it. There's another one coming up next Tuesday as well, which of course we will give analysis on that also. next time around. Thanks so much for your time today. Remember to subscribe on YouTube, to Tom Jordan Live on Facebook. Go to X. You can catch the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Wherever you get your podcast, subscribe, watch, and share. That is the best way you can help us out. Or you can do what the engineer has done, and you can go to Patreon. Go to Tom Jordan Live on Patreon. Help us out there. It's $2.50 a month or $5 a month. Either way, and we'll get you different tiers of exclusive content. That is on the way, engineer. So thanks for your patience. Appreciate it very much, and for your support. Thanks for watching today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, 9 a.m., streaming live on YouTube, X, and Facebook. Until then, I'm Tom Jordan, and God bless you.